turn it over to Reverend Fajun for the Tao of Amy.
Well, there's no telling how this talk is going to turn out. Well, personal share briefly. As you all likely know, I am going to be taking a sabbatical from ministry for a moment. Obviously, I'll be stepping back from my role here, but you may not have known I'm going to be taking a break from being a minister because I think every decade or so, I was ordained in 2008 and have been ministering since about 2011. And I think probably every decade people should take a sabbatical of a significant period of time if we are growing and changing. I imagine there are some prodigious, amazing people who can like grow and change on the fly and then come back next week and have integrated that enough. Say like, and here's a talk about it. The world is changing, I'm changing, but we just change on our feet. I might need a couple months or years. I'm not sure. There's a lot of change both within and without. Anyway, personal share, because some folks are like, well, what are you doing next? Taking a break. For at least 2 months. I'm taking at least July and August off, and then we'll see. But I'm taking a little break from ministering the pot. And that has me thinking about, personally, what is my ministry? Because I do still have something of a ministerial vocation, and they say in the lore of ministerial types that often you will have a personal vocation, a personal calling or ministry. And I wanted to share with you, because it pertains to our service, what mine is. What's mine, in case you wanted to know. Okay, what is it? I thought about it. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. Oh yeah. So my main vocation, what I want to share, if I had anything to preach, it would be understanding how we participate in the act of perception, and especially understanding the most common cognitive biases, such as negativity bias, loss aversion, primacy biases, things like that. Okay, so we participate in our perceptual experience. We actually had a great example of this morning. The renters yesterday or this week, whenever, sometime before now, didn't put stuff away where it was supposed to go. And so we're scrambling around. Linda first scrambled, and then Dave and I began co-scrambling, and all three of us eggs were scrambling around, searching for this box of sound equipment that was sitting in plain view, not where it belonged, on a shelf in the West room over there. And it's, okay, now that wasn't supposed to make you scowl, Donna. I thought we already scowled about that. But what it's supposed to say is that we negatively hallucinated. Are those too big of words for this time of day on a Sunday? Anyway, we didn't see the fact that it was sitting right there with the label out. Sound equipment was sitting right there. And is it in this closet? Oh, I'll get the key for cupboard number 1. Well, did you look over here? Because all of the perceptual energy, we don't just see the room as it is. There's too much stuff. There's too much stuff to see. Our eyes literally ping around and find main points, and then we construct a picture inside, largely made of our expectations. That's pretty cool. It's also getting pretty cool in this room. What do you think? How are you? Would you be willing to, I don't know if that's even controllable.
No.
Okay, would you be willing, everyone, to imagine yourself warm? That's the best I can do for you. Hey, there we go. Thanks, Joe. So if there's anything that I long to preach, it's that we participate in the act of perception, and then that participation is widely known to be colored by these facilitated shortcuts in the Homo sapien brain. things like negativity bias, right? Your spouse scowls a little bit, and the brain has this amazing power to construct a massive, terrible, worst case scenario out of what, like they had an itch or something like that, right? If we just knew this, I believe, well, gosh, it would make our marriages better. It might make our day. This is where like learned optimism and active hope all come from, is our ability to choose how we're participating in perception. But I think if this were widely known, if this were common sense, we might be less easily hoodwinked and manipulated as a society by those actors who want to play on our loss aversion, our negativity bias, our my side bias, our tribalism, our tendency to polarize. If we knew those were a thing and how much they color, how much they hallucinate our world into existence, we might be a little less able to be puppeted by forces that don't have anyone's interest at heart but their own. So the Tao of maybe relates to this somehow. Oh gosh, how does this relate to it? Maybe is a power word that we can use to help us navigate complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. Maybe is a power word. The word maybe, just like that dad in the story who may not have been the most empathetic parent ever. I got to go back and check about that. But what he did know was that maybe is a power word that can help us navigate ambiguity, uncertainty, and another word that means the same thing as that, but you're supposed to have three in a good talk. These states of complexity, ambiguity, uncertainty, those are the times when non-benevolent actors see their opportunity to manipulate you. Because we as humans, unless you're like a really like highly trained meditator, we really don't like uncertainty. We really don't like ambiguity. And unfortunately, that's what the world is made of. And so when people come along and they offer you a golden age fallacy, all we got to do is make America great again, like it was back in the 1950s, when the boys were boys and the girls were girls and everyone knew their place. Mostly color sorted, I think it was. Right? They'll offer you some line of bull like that. And if you're not able to navigate complexity, you'll go, oh, things feel a lot more certain now. Someone's got the answer and they said it really loud. Head chimp knows the answer, and we can just follow along. If we know the power of maybe, if we could just say, once upon a time, America was great, unambiguously. And if we were just like, maybe, if you could just get get the thin edge of the wedge of maybe underneath there, you could topple an entire manipulation stream that was about to come down the line. It's a pretty amazing thing. Maybe is a power word that we can use to navigate complexity, uncertainty, and ambiguity. But if used incorrectly, it can enable us in cognitive dissonance and being ruled by negative mental habits. So maybe as well is not unambiguous, but it is a power word. So maybe is what our minds are already doing. As human beings, your minds are maybe machines. They're maybe machines. Or another way you could say it is your minds are scenario generators. Your minds are scenario generators. In a way, really popular topic right now, the human mind is kind of like an advanced artificial intelligence, right? So these like the chat GPTs and stuff like that, right? You can type in and it's like, write me a story about a prince and a dragon in the voice of Tolkien or something like that. And it'll come up with some stuff. The research shows now that don't ask it for facts though, because half of what, 2/3 of what it comes up with is fabricated, and kids are using this for their essays and stuff, and it's worse than Wikipedia. So just so you know. Anyway, but that's actually quite a bit like your mind as well, because you ask your mind like, hey, what's the worst thing that could happen today? Which is what we do if we are trapped in depression or anxiety. This is one of the things that we're doing without our knowledge. We ask the mind, what's the worst thing that could happen today? And the mind, as a wonderful servant, like the Sufis teach us, goes, well, here are 5 things I found. And it'll just, this could happen, it could go terrible this way, it could go terrible this way. Oh my gosh, what a devoted and loyal servant. It's always doing its job of finding exactly what we ask it for. And if we don't know that we have a little control in the asking. We don't have 100% control, right? This is the thing. Don't take this as me saying, so if you're depressed or anxious, just ask better questions. Like, you might need some help. I actually experienced this this morning and often when I'm on my commute here, because there's a drive down through the mountains where the trees are kind of murky, and it takes about the same time to get through that part as it does for the caffeine to get into my bloodstream. And I was watching my mind today with this subject matter priming me. I'm watching my mind, and as I'm driving through the mountains, I'm like, okay, well, I wonder how many people won't like the talk. Oh gosh, I wonder if I'm not going to be able to finish that one part that seems a little rough still. Oh God. And then there's this point where you come down the hill into the Valley of Sacramento, and the whole thing, it like opens up as this vista. And I've noticed over and over again, and that's also when the juice hits my neurons, my mind will shift into, but it might be a lot better than you expected. And we're going to sing that particular song. That's going to be really fun. So there are other factors aside perhaps than just, well, what kind of questions are you asking yourself? There are chemical factors, there are environmental factors. But today's talk is don't neglect the power you have to ask your mind better questions and also fact check the responses. This little AI machine is just gonna populate a bunch of stuff like, well, Joe on the internet said this, I'll put that in your essay. And it's absolute gunk, right? It populates stuff based on like what your mom said when you were 7 and didn't have a filter to say no, and that's just in there. And the little AI will just repeat it for you as a loyal servant. Okay, so we're scenario generators. The mind is like an advanced AI. You ask it questions, it has a whole search mode, and it populates the answers. Those answers aren't always very creative, but it always does its job. This game of maybe the mind plays is often neutral, sometimes fun, but can also work against us. So let's get rid of the 3 main misuses of maybe. We're going to study the Tao of maybe. We got to study how not to misuse this power word. Number 1, misusing maybe when the mind has gotten very good at generating worst case scenarios. Oh, it makes me think of a joke. What do you call a day that's ruined by a bad German sausage? Oh, worst case scenario. Okay, what do you call an indecisive pollinator? A maybe. What do you call a pollinator at the height of spring? Same answer, a maybe. One misuse of maybe is when the mind is overly good at generating worst case scenarios. So this is, we participate in our perceptual experience, but your mind is in the factory settings. It's colored by negativity bias. This we've always you've heard me say before, probably, if you mistake a stick for a snake, no problem. Right? If it's a stick and you go, oh gosh, it's a snake, and you figure, oh, it was just a stick, no problem. But if you're walking along and there's a poison, is it poisonous or venomous? I don't remember. One of those snakes that might kill you, and you go, oh, just a stick, that's a real problem. So your mind is weighted to find negative stuff. And then especially we're finding in the realm of memory, when we look back, this negativity bias, it's a real bummer. We remember bad stuff more easily than we remember good stuff. There are a few of you who like hit the genetic lottery and like have extra. My partner's dad is like this. He was just telling us he's got like extra serotonin or something like that. Like, you dirty devil, man. So it's not the case for 100% of us, but most Homo sapiens, bad times, good times, and then bad times. And they loom naturally large in our mind because our brains are trying to maximize survival. And you do that by avoiding danger. And how do we avoid danger? Well, remember the last time it happened? Never get in circumstances that look even slightly like that again. Sirens right on cue. So we give more weight to the painful maybes when we're looking at our life. If you're in the default settings, you haven't done anything to sort of massage them in a different direction. We look at life and we give more weight to the painful maybes. We ask, hey, what might happen today, brain? And the brain goes, uh-oh, you're not gonna like this. But have you seen the news? Well, from that, I extrapolate that this is gonna happen. What are the rates of single people over 30 finding the love of their life? I read an article in Cosmo that said, outlook's not good. And wow, we're really good at generating these. And it's more difficult to wake up and go like, I wonder if today's the day that somebody innovates something that reverses climate change. Just like, okay, I don't know, maybe I'm alone, but I rarely wake up and go, I wonder how those bacteria that eat plastic are doing. Like they just found them. Are they growing? Have they found the Pacific garbage patch yet? Like, are we employing these plastic eating bacteria enough yet? Maybe they have a relative that like turns plastic into a non-greenhouse emitting fuel or something. Like, have we talked to these bacteria and see if they have any relatives like that? My brain doesn't do that when I wake up. My brain wakes up and goes like, uh-oh, wonder what that one guy running for president said. It wants to look at my phone and go, what's happening in Florida? Which is not the question you should ask. And you'll populate this stream of maybes that you don't want. This is a misuse of maybes. Life is uncertain, and our brains like to generalize so we can predict what will happen. Unfortunately, we may generalize in a way that limits our possibilities or decreases our thriving. In cognitive behavioral therapy, there are a number of what they call cognitive distortions. If you want a vocab word for today, cognitive distortions is your vocab word for the day. These are things like the always never statements that can sometimes run in your brain. If you've ever been to marital counseling, one of the first things they'll teach you to do is like, stop using the always never with you. You never do the dishes. I mean, they may have never once done the dishes in your marriage, but if you invoke that they never do, they certainly never will. It's weird how that works. These are ways that our minds are trying to take the infinite field of possibilities of what might happen today or next week or in 2024 and boil them down to what can I expect? Right? We're very practical. And so we go by memory. Our memories are weighted by avoidance of pain and loss. And so we may generalize that negative things are going to happen. Worst case scenarios are one of these cognitive distortions that they call fortune telling, right? So we predict, and again, I see this a lot in like marital counseling. They'll come in and go, well, what seems to be the problem? And someone, instead of talking about the now, will talk about what's inevitably going to happen 5 weeks from now, 5 years from now, etc. We're fortune telling, and it's a cognitive distortion because it's not reality, it's a maybe. That might happen. You might be basing your assessment of reality on really good evidence, but it's not what's happening now. The weird thing about our bodies is that our bodies, the whole chemistry, the adrenaline and the cortisol and the norepinephrine and all of this stuff responds to the pictures we make in our head almost as well as the pictures that we see like in real life, right? You make a picture of somebody shouting at you, somebody disliking you, somebody scowling at you. Oh gosh, I asked a lady about her dog this morning at the coffee shop and she didn't ask if I wanted to say hi and pet them. And just remembering that just drained the oxytocin right out of my brain. It was a real bummer, man. The picture itself works the chemistry of your body. And we got to know that we're doing that with our maybes. If we populate a whole field of uncomfortable, unthriving, negative maybes, we will be diminishing our health, diminishing our well-being, diminishing our peace of mind, based on a shortcut that was our body trying to pick good solutions for our thriving, right? Okay, so one practice you might do would be to learn to cultivate best case scenarios more and more intentionally. I could wake up and, like, as I do, when I cheat, when the coffee starts to actually hit my neurons, then I go, what might be the best thing that could happen today? You can look back, you can start to bias your memory. You can look back over your day. My partner and I do this at dinner, and we ask each other questions like, where did you really succeed today? Where did you do something that felt courageous? What was your favorite thing that happened today? Where did you live your values? We begin to bias the mind so that the maybes it comes up with, it's also like an AI in that it will autofill suggestions based on your previous requests. If we request more life-affirming maybes, you will get more life-affirming maybes automatically. Okay, number one, that was number one, misuse of maybes. Second one is the lack of an appropriate maybe in conversation. This is cognitive dissonance. This is when Rob comes and tells me, hey, they found these bacteria that'll eat plastic and I think it's gonna save the world. And if I'm feeling like a curmudgeon that day, I'll go, no, they didn't. No. Wanted a good relationship, I would have said, maybe that's true. So your first vocab word was cognitive distortions. Your second vocab phrase, this is a magical mantra actually, my Tibetan Buddhist Lama taught me, is to repeat to yourself the phrase, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. Now, you don't need to apply this to Jewish space lasers, right? There's a limit to maybe that's true. But there are some people who, like, you sort of want to keep a decent relationship because you're like related to them by blood or something like that. And they're going to say to you, maybe it's a good thing if we default on the national debt. Like, things have to change. Maybe the swamp needs to be drained, and you might want to go, you are full of malarkey. I think that was what Joe Biden would say. You're full of malarkey, Jack. But you might try, maybe that's true. Because in a world of complexity and ambiguity, of course, I have my perspective that that's a bad idea. But if I want to generate empathy, I might be able to I might want to ask, why do you think that's a good idea? What outcomes are you projecting that I'm not projecting? And in the process, I give myself a little more of an expansive mind, and I begin the practice of building bridges instead of walls. Okay, so you got two vocabulary words first. So far, do you remember what your first one was? We got college students in the audience. Okay, excellent. Cognitive distortions. And what was your second? It was a phrase, a whole phrase. Maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. So if you didn't like this part of the sermon, use the phrase I just taught you, please. Okay, then we have the last one. The last misuse of maybe is the other half of that one. So, we want like, hey, maybe that's true. Maybe that's true. But it's balanced by the third one. We misuse our maybe when there are facts we could be using instead. So maybe is a cool thing. Oh, wow, I wonder wow, this is neat. And then there are folks in the world who want to like philosophize us into outer space when we could actually be talking about the impact on real human lives. There are facts we could look up. Is America in a moral downward spiral? There's actually no way to answer that question, because what a moral downward spiral means to any person is going to be completely different than what it means to someone else. Unless you narrow your terms and define them specifically, you can't have that conversation. But a lot of people want to have that conversation because it's good for rage farming. Rage farming is good for advertisers. Advertisers are good for consolidating wealth at the top. Okay, that's a different tangent, but the world I gotta go back to my notes before I get on a tangent, please bear with me. The world is uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, but there are still facts. There are still facts. So the third misuse of maybe is when we make decisions, especially social policy, based on speculation instead of things that we can observe. Maybe God punishes those nations which are sinful and have fallen from the true way. Maybe that's true. We give airtime to your PhD sociologists. Why aren't you giving any airtime to our religious scholars that want to say, because maybe it's true. God punishes those nations which are sinful as defined by some weirdo's niche interpretation of a really old book. Maybe society is degrading morally. We might be in a downward spiral, the results of which could be catastrophic. Again, based on someone's niche interpretation of a dusty set of books written by numerous authors who we've tried to interpret have univocality, but in fact had no univocality at the time of their work. The problem is not attempting moral philosophy in general, but that none of these have actual observations at their base. So we're going on someone's speculation, one we are using in order to reduce the uncertainty in our lives. Uncertainty is so terrifying that we're willing to accept just a random thought. Like, what if there was a guy upstairs who looked like Zeus but isn't Zeus, and he wants to punish you for your sexual orientation? What if that was true? And like, okay, the mind can come up with anything, but should that have any application to the real lives of human beings with human hearts? To reduce uncertainty, we necessarily attempt to reduce complexity. But here we go wrong because life, the actual world, is complex. In order to reduce complexity, we actually have to go extraterrestrial. So we went from AIs, the common mythos enemy since Terminator, all the way back to extraterrestrials. Meaning we have to look beyond the world. If you want a world that's not complex, that fits into simple binaries, we got the right ones and the wrong ones, we got the saved and the unsaved, you have to look at a fictional world. Perhaps there is value when this means looking to your inner life, looking to sources of inspiration that allow us to be in the world but not of it. But all too often, we go beyond the world in that we make assumptions, presumptions, and speculations which are not based in anything observable, but based rather solely in our feelings. There's a real good conservative motto nowadays: facts don't care about your feelings. Usually said after like some specious data that you can't find anything to back it up. It's an okay slogan, but more practical might be the understanding that our feelings don't care about the facts. Our fear of uncertainty, our desire to have an explainable world, manipulates our perception so that life shows up according to what we think might be true, what we're already biased toward seeing. As we saw before, the mind is so prone to biases, particularly biases like negativity bias and loss aversion. We are so prone to using the fast thinking system of our brain, as Kahneman calls it, and making snap judgments that have very little to do with reality. Are we really going to trust our gut feelings and suppositions and the mythologies we've made up in our heads to make a good world for ourselves and others? It's a misuse of maybe. Maybe J.R.R. Tolkien was remembering a suppressed history that happened on Antarctica. And if we just wait, that's why global warming is a good thing. Because as the ice melts, Gondor and Rohan will be... I mean, maybe. But I'm not going to base my life on these mythologies. We're back in another distortion if we try to tell the future or mind read others outside the realm of facts. This has power for debate because if we can identify where we're dealing with maybes versus where we're dealing with facts, we can get more clear. We can refuse to argue about mythology. We can just refuse. Oh yeah, the Jewish space laser thing, that's just anti-Semitism. I refuse to have any further conversation with you. You don't get maybe that's true, unless we're going to talk about observable phenomenon instead of repeating racist tropes. We can refuse to argue mythology, to get into a religious battle of whose maybes will win, and we can honor what our own values, even our own opinions and preferences, and how those relate to the facts and to our choices. That was the third misuse of maybe. I'm sorry, that one didn't come with a vocabulary word. Just a rant. Okay, so if those are the misuses of maybe, how do you use your maybe for good? How do you use your maybe for good? If we get beyond these misuses, we can use maybe for the power word it is. I propose you do that by learning to live life in reverse. When it's not a matter of suppositions replacing facts to try to reduce complexity, but rather that the outcomes are uncertain and effects are ambiguous, aka most of the time. Most of the decisions we make, the outcomes are somewhat uncertain, the effects are somewhat ambiguous. These are the times to utilize the power of our mind, rather than allowing it to go down the well-worn track of negativity bias and other mental shortcuts. We can use maybe to invoke such skills as active hope and learned optimism, because those positive outcomes are just as likely as the negative outcomes that a primate brain is more easily, has an easier time of picturing. So we can intentionally place before our minds a best case scenario. No bad German sausage required. We place before our minds a best case scenario, and then we can work backwards from that to invoke our agency, considering if this best case scenario were to come about. I like the one about the bacteria that eat the plastics, and then they have a byproduct of a non-greenhouse fuel, and then we reverse climate change. So, okay, if that were to come about, what would need to happen? We're using our maybes, we're using the little Siri or Alexa or whoever you like in there to populate a list of answers based on questions that will increase our thriving. What would need to happen for that? And specifically, what might I be able to contribute? Based on what I might be able to contribute, what would my next action be? For me, it's giving a talk called The Tao of Maybe. It's all too easy to despair about the negative maybes we project on the horizon. These projections are unfortunately based on observable evidence. Okay, so you didn't violate Rule 3. It's all too easy to go down that road. But by understanding the hardware and software of our minds, we can use maybe to leverage ourselves into exerting what influence we actually have. The proper use of maybe allows for a miraculous pivot from the disempowering and stress-filled question, what's the worst possible outcome, that our minds automatically ask, pivoting to the empowering and agentic question, how can I help? Used this way, maybe makes you a flexible force for good and makes those best case scenarios a lot more likely. So this is the Tao of Maybe. Thank you so much for listening and memorizing your vocabulary words. I'd love to sing together this song with you, written by our own Dave and Lynn, as you might be able to see in tiny print. So if you would please rise in body or in spirit, we'll sing together here in this moment.
Here
live lives of dignity. In this moment and all moments that we meet, let us see each other and all our humanity. Let us see each other and all our humanity. Let into shine a world of equality. Let us help each other to live lives of dignity. As we extinguish our chalice this morning, please find somebody's eyes, or if you're a handful of height, joy, love, peace, and until we meet again. Let joy and love and peace be in our hearts until we meet again. Joy, love, peace in our hearts until we meet again. Let joy and love and peace be in our hearts until we meet again. Okay, maybe there's coffee out there. Maybe there's some snacks. Good luck, everyone.
Maybe there's milk bread out there.
I'm so confused.